What's up, y'all? My name is Andrew Defy, aka the Gorilla Poet Laureate, aka the Hoodie God, aka Spitting Quarantino, aka I wear my sunglasses at night indoors because my eyes are as sensitive as my heart is, y'all. And we are back with another episode of Masked Up, the community health live stream. Although who knows? Maybe we'll have to change the name of this show soon. People are starting to get back together without the masks. We are seeing some hugging going on in these streets. It is a beautiful thing. Like, I personally don't care about your freshly vaxxed photo with your band-aid and your card. You know what I'm saying? Show me the picture of you hugging the homies for the first time in a year. You know what I mean? Just mwah. May is Mental Health Month. It is also AAPI Heritage Month, so we are bringing you some of both tonight and debuting a new and improved segment with our own Allison Lee, talking to attorney and community leader Grace Yu. I am so excited for this. Also on the show tonight, we've got esteemed California Senator Sidney Kamlager. No big deal. Just California senators out here. You remember when I used to interview the puppet that I lived with on this show? We have come a long way, is all I'm saying. We do want to thank our broadcast partners, especially Protect Us, who helps us blast the show out to half the internet every week. We also want to thank those of you who shared the show, clips, graphics, etc., and remind you that the only agenda on this here show is community, health, and science. Now, I do want to shift gears and talk about something real quick, as it is Mental Health Month. I think a lot of us are struggling, maybe more than we care to admit right now, and I think it's important that we make space for these conversations. See, this reemergence is difficult in many ways on a lot of us. See, I decided to go out with a friend the other night for a quick bite downtown here in Sacramento. And as we turned down this one street, there were a whole bunch of people just eating and enjoying themselves. And I got hit with this big wave of anxiety, right? So we ended up leaving that area, going over to a more secluded spot where there were a few less people around. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what was comfortable. And I tell you that just to say, be easy with yourselves as we come out of all of this. Listen to your body about what you need and what you're ready for. Everybody's kind of doing this on their own pace, and there's no shame in seeking help ever. And especially after we lived the last year, plus in the middle of a traumatic episode. That's all. If you're going through it, you're not alone. And we'll continue working to bring you resources, interviews, and information every week. All right, now let's get to the show and figure out what's actually going on in Pandemi Lovato news with the weekly Rona update. Even with the increased testing, all the numbers are trending downward fast in California. Y'all, I cannot tell you how excited I am to report this news after the last 6 months of doing this show week in and week out. Cases and deaths are down. Test positivity is down. Fewer patients hospitalized. More ICU beds available. Most of California still remains in the moderate orange tier, but we're going to talk more about reopening news in the next segment, as some interesting news has been coming down regarding Governor Newsom's plans to get California back up and running and the statewide mask mandate. You know what? Let's just get to it right now. The latest health news. Okay, so there's been a lot of information and new guidelines being dropped by the CDC as far as masking recommendations, especially for vaccinated people. Governor Newsom made some really big multi-layered announcements this week. There's just a lot going on. For so long, everything was static, and now it's all back up and going with all the moving parts. And we just wanted to make sure that you had a clear picture of the recommendations and the reopening vision. So let's start off with California as a whole. Governor Gavin Newsom has announced California will reopen June 15th as long as we meet two criteria, and these are We must keep vaccines available for everyone over 16 who wants them. We must keep hospitalizations stable and low. Over 20 million vaccines have been administered in California so far, and we currently have the lowest test positivity rate in the US. So what does this mean for masks? Do we still have to be ninjas? Because some of us are very tired of it, and I mean, others of us have kind of taken to it. From the Associated Press, California Governor Gavin Newsom said Tuesday the nation's most populous state would stop requiring people to wear masks in almost all circumstances on June 15th, describing a world he said will look, and I quote, a lot like the world we entered into before the pandemic. We're not wearing face coverings. We're not restricted in any way, shape, or form from doing the old things that we used to do, save for huge, large-scale indoor convention events like that, where we use our common sense, Newsom said in an interview with Fox 11's Alex Michelson. Last Thursday, the CDC made a major announcement regarding masking in the U.S. Anyone who is fully vaccinated can participate in indoor and outdoor activities, large or small, without wearing a mask or physical distancing, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky said during a White House briefing. If you are fully vaccinated, you can start doing the things that you had stopped doing because of the pandemic. Y'all, that just happened. Can we stop and recognize the moment that is finally here? I'm getting to report that. Like, I've been waiting to report this for half a year now, as long as we've been doing this show every week. I'm going to read that again. Anyone who is fully vaccinated can participate in indoor and outdoor activities, large or small, without wearing a mask or physical distancing, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky said during the White House briefing. If you are fully vaccinated, you can start doing the things that you stopped doing because of the pandemic. Newsom told the Associated Press that the state would require wearing masks only for those massively large settings where people from around the world, not just around the country, are conversing. We'll make guidance recommendations, but no mandates and no restrictions on businesses, large or small, Newsom said. It's worth mentioning that Newsom's change of attitude around masking mandates comes as organizers petitioning for his recall have gathered enough signatures that it appears he may face a recall election later this year. For now, until June 15th, California guidance requires people to wear a mask when gathering indoors with people who are not vaccinated. Fully vaccinated people can meet indoors without wearing a mask. They can also not wear a mask outdoors, except when attending large gatherings such as sporting events, festivals, and concerts. And that's the latest health news. We all know racism is a public health crisis, and it affects each race differently in America, like it affects our bodily systems differently, from our physical to our mental to our emotional health. With this skyrocketing hate crimes against our Asian American Pacific Islander family, what effect is it having on the mental health of the community? What side effects are we seeing from this wave of anti-Asian violence? City News Toronto did this great piece on the effects that racism is having on the mental health of our AAPI fam.
The pandemic has taken a toll on everyone's mental health, but it's been particularly difficult for those in the Asian community who are also dealing with a disturbing rise in anti-Asian racism. And while reaching out for support can be helpful, some experts worry that there is a growing number of people who are struggling in silence and won't get the help they need until their illness becomes critical.
Get out of my face! I'm Canadian. I'm going to give you 2 seconds.
The videos are disturbing, the stats alarming. In Vancouver alone, hate crimes against Asians have risen 717% in the span of a year, according to advocacy group The Representation Project.
People feel sad, people feel angry. Some people feel numb because they just sing this over and over and over again.
Lin Fang is an associate professor of social work at the University in Toronto and says she too has felt increased levels of anxiety and feelings of helplessness. She says she's been on the racing end of racist attacks. She's been shoved on the street and even spat on.
I've seen a lot more than what I've seen before, and I start to question, right? I start to question my own safety. I start to question my own physical awareness. There's always this hypervigilance. I worry about when I'm on the street, if someone's going to attack me.
The anxiety combined with repeated videos and images on social media can take a heavy toll. But Fang and other experts say it isn't always easy for those who are Asian or of Asian descent to seek mental health support. Long-standing cultural stigmas around mental illness can be a barrier to care.
Oftentimes, the problem of the individual become amplified. It's like you bring shame to the family.
Certain cultures might not have the language to articulate the mental health issues that in a Western medical system says. For example, the symptoms of depression, anxiety might not be called symptoms of depression or anxiety in various cultures.
The Hong Fook Mental Health Association in Markham, Ontario specifically targets the concerns of Chinese, Cambodian, Vietnamese, and Korean communities. Kenneth Lin is the Youth and Family Services lead and says while virtual sessions amid the pandemic have been helpful in reaching more people, there hasn't been a noticeable increase in those seeking services amid the pandemic, a worrying sign.
Around 83%, especially of younger youth, younger than 18 years old, are most emotionally and psychologically impacted by seeing the attacks around them. We are concerned that there's still a large group of youth who aren't articulating or reaching out for support.
The association is now taking an active role in seeking out youth who need help. Joyce Chu is an outreach worker. She gets referrals from school staff or from parents and goes out into the community to meet young people who are struggling and have been isolated or feel alone.
It's my role to find ways to engage with them in small but meaningful ways in order to reconnect.
What's most important to know is that you're not alone and that there are others out there who are experiencing something similar to you and who are out there in support of you.
For a link to the resources available from the Hong Fook Mental Health Association, head to our website, citynews.ca/extras. For City News, I'm Erica Natividad.
I am so excited about the debut of this new segment. We've got one of our incredible correspondents who stays in the field, stepping on screen for the first time to have an incredibly important conversation with a powerful and poignant community leader. Y'all, revamped, new and improved. I give you Mask Off with Allison Lee.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, and I'm really pleased to be with you tonight at Mask Off.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you on as our inaugural guest for Mask Off, which is a brand new segment where we sit down with community members to have informal and authentic conversations about their lived experiences during and before the pandemic. So today we are joined with the amazing Grace Yu, who is a Los Angeles attorney and community leader, and she's going to be discussing her experiences as an Asian American. So this month is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which I think is amazing because it's super important for us to celebrate and be proud of our culture as Asian Americans. But, you know, I can't help but also think that it's bittersweet considering the fact that anti-Asian sentiment has been at such a high as of late. So since the start of the pandemic, we have definitely seen a dramatic increase in the number of AAPI hate crimes. Have you had any personal experiences with this type of hate since the start of the pandemic? And if so, how has this impacted you?
Well, because of the pandemic, I can tell you I wasn't out very much, right? We were on lockdown for nearly a year. And the reality is I take care of my older parents, and it was a good thing because here in Los Angeles, it's been really rough and ugly for older Asian Americans being violently hit with bricks. And this was happening even before the pandemic, and, you know, Trump calling out the virus as a Chinese flu, just really unleashing the hatred and the anger out onto Asian Americans. We were the scapegoats. This is not the first time it's happened to Asian Americans. I'm a first generation Asian American, having been brought to Los Angeles in the early 70s as a toddler. So it's one of those realities where we are still a small number here in Los Angeles County, only 12% Asian American, but the hate crimes against us have really just, you know, overreached our numbers. Unfortunately, we are too well represented in this arena.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. And you touched on this briefly, but this recent rise in AAPI hate during the pandemic surprise you in any way? Or, as you mentioned, all of this rhetoric from politicians calling the virus like Kung flu or just blaming Asian Americans for the pandemic. Did all of this kind of lead you to not be that surprised that there was an increase in this hate, or was this something that was unexpected for you to witness?
I can't say that I was surprised, but the amount and the fact that we have all these Karens coming about, you hear about Asian Americans, just in the park distancing themselves, and yet you have haters coming up, taunting, physically attacking. It actually shocked me, the huge physical violence upon our AAPI seniors. It's one thing to try to sort of pick on somebody your own size or your own age, but when you go off and try to beat up octogenarians, this is ugly and this is low. And it's just awful. And so I was actually really happy when we had the granny fight and defend herself, right? She was amazing and resilient. And that is who we are. We are mighty and strong, and we are resilient. So I was actually really happy to see Stop AAPI Hate and the traction that our younger people were able to bring about. I know you can't really tell how old I am or you are, but I'll tell you, I am AARP eligible, and therefore, having had a few decades under my belt, I can tell you that I see a difference from when I was 20 to now. 3 decades later, there is a huge difference in how the AAP response has become greater. And I'm really excited about that. Having been at the forefront of anti-Asian hate and racism for the past few decades, I can tell you there has been a change in how we, the AAPI community, is responding. And that is encouraging.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it has been really shocking, even despite all the rhetoric, to see the level of hate, especially against our most vulnerable communities like Asian women, and also, as you mentioned, our Asian elders, which was just really, really tragic to see. But also, it is inspiring to see that a lot of people are now starting to pick up the conversation about stopping API hate and just leading to more discussions like these about the Asian American experience and what we can do to stay resilient through all of this. So,
and I'm always really happy to see when we have non-AAPI coming out and defending, folks who are Asian American. It's really nice to see. And I don't want to discount that, because that is what we need to do. We as human beings need to stand up for one another. And it's wonderful to see that.
yes, definitely. I definitely agree with that. All of us as a community, whether we are part of the AAPI community or just allies, it's really important for all of us to just come together, especially at such a difficult time.
Right. And having been a minority my entire life, standing up for others is just always the way I've behaved.
Definitely, especially as an attorney, and a community leader like yourself. That's
Having been the executive director at NAPABA, the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, it has always been at the forefront that we have appropriate representation, not just attorneys that are AAPI, but making sure that the bench, that judges look like us. It was important. And so those are the things I fought for. And it's so nice when we have so many Article 3 AAPI judges and state judges. And it's comforting to have so many Asian American faces on the judicial bench.
Yes, definitely. Although discussions surrounding AAPI hate are getting more attention lately due to the coronavirus pandemic, anti-Asian sentiment is unfortunately nothing new to our community. Can you tell us a little bit about your past experiences growing up as an Asian American?
You know, they call us they call us the model minority, but actually we are the invisible minority, because so often we are not counted. You'll say black and brown, and you forget about Asian. It's just like, oh, wait, they're kind of there. I remember one of my mentors, she was amazing. Her name Susan Cuddy. She passed away at the young age of 100. This woman was a trailblazer. First female gunnery instructor ever. First Asian American naval officer. She broke color lines wherever she went, because she was in the military in the 1930s and 40s actually, I should say. She ended up making a stir, because when she was in the South and there was the coloreds or whites, she would definitely go into the line for coloreds. And her white female officers would say, Susan, what are you doing over there? And she'd be like, I'm not white. She would preface that so that people would understand that, hey, I'm not. I am a person of color. And the reality is, she was not allowed to join as an officer. She had to enlist, because in California, although the requirement was for you to just have finished college, and she had finished college, they would not accept her. It was only when she was on the East Coast that they were like, why are you not part of officer candidate school, right? The way in which people treat us as, yes, you are a minority. No, you're not a minority. That's really a shame, because the reality is we are not the majority. We are in the minority. And anywhere and everywhere you turn, whether it's United Farm Workers or it was the Black Panthers, there were Asian Americans in the group leading along. And I just want to remind folks that we've been here for hundreds of years. This is not our first generation Americans. We're talking third, fourth, fifth generation Asian Americans. And yet they continue to keep us out of the history books as if we don't belong, but we do belong. And that's what I want us to remember, that AAPIs, we've been here, we've helped make America great, and the diversity includes AAPIs.
Yes, I love that you mentioned, especially with the model minority myth, a lot of people just kind of lump us in our own category separate from, like, as you stated, people of color. But I think doing that kind of ignores the history of discrimination against Asian Americans in the United States. So it's important to also remember the experiences of Asian Americans and really promote these discussions about diversity.
It's amazing. You would think, oh, that's just something that happened in the past. Not true. So let's take the railroads. We know that Chinese Americans helped build the railroads. They weren't really, taught, or we weren't taught that in our American history classes, our US history class, but they were there. They were sacrificing their lives building this Continental Railroad, right? And what the saddest part is, when they had 100 years celebration, there were several Asian Americans there, and they were not in the photo. When they took that huge photo, they left them out. It's like, wait a second. You're bringing everyone together for 100-year celebration, and 100 years later, you still want to deny the fact that Asian Americans helped build this railroad. So when we are not counted, when we are continuously considered the other or the invisible people, I want us to raise our voices so that people see us, but they hear us. And I'm so glad that Dr. Pan has, started this, and mask off is important. So I really appreciate the fact that you're spending time having people understand where we as the AAPI community are going and have come from.
Yes, thank you so much. Just thank you for sharing all of your experiences and insight about the reality of what it's like to live as an Asian American in the US right now. Thank you so much. And is there anything else you would like to tell our viewers before we log off?
Just keep doing what you're doing. I love the younger generation being so visible, so loud. And, whether it's podcasts or just taking the internet by storm, you're doing a great job. I appreciate and applaud your stepping up for our elders and for carving out the next generation so that we are no longer invisible. So thank you for doing your part.
Thank you so much. And we're really excited to be wrapping up this discussion with you. And we're so glad that you took time out to speak with us about your experiences. So I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So it is Mental Health Month, and we've been talking a lot about depression and anxiety this month. But what exactly is depression? A lot of us don't understand the science of depression versus just being depressed, and it is a big difference that affects over 10% of adults in the US, and Ted Ed breaks it down perfectly in this video.
Depression is the leading cause of disability in the world. In the United States, close to 10% of adults struggle with depression. But because it's a mental illness, it can be a lot harder to understand than, say, high cholesterol. One major source of confusion is the difference between having depression and just feeling depressed. Almost everyone feels down from time to time. Getting a bad grade, losing a job, having an argument, even a rainy day can bring on feelings of sadness. Sometimes there's no trigger at all. It just pops up out of the blue. Then circumstances change, and those sad feelings disappear. Clinical depression is different. It's a medical disorder, and it won't go away just because you want it to. It lingers for at least 2 consecutive weeks and significantly interferes with one's ability to work, play, or love. Depression can have a lot of different symptoms: a low mood, loss of interest in things you'd normally enjoy, changes in appetite, feeling worthless or excessively guilty, sleeping either too much or too little, poor concentration, restlessness or slowness, loss of energy, or recurrent thoughts of suicide. If you have at least 5 of those symptoms, according to psychiatric guidelines, you qualify for a diagnosis of depression. And it's not just behavioral symptoms. Depression has physical manifestations inside the brain. First of all, there are changes that could be seen with the naked eye and X-ray vision. These include smaller frontal lobes and hippocampal volumes. On a more micro scale, depression is associated with a few things: the abnormal transmission or depletion of certain neurotransmitters, especially serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, blunted circadian rhythms, or specific changes in the REM and slow wave parts of your sleep cycle, and hormone abnormalities, such as high cortisol and deregulation of thyroid hormones. But neuroscientists still don't have a complete picture of what causes depression. It seems to have to do with a complex interaction between genes and environment, but we don't have a diagnostic tool that can accurately predict where or when it will show up. And because depression's symptoms are intangible, it's hard to know who might look fine but is actually struggling. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, it takes the average person suffering with a mental illness over 10 years to ask for help. But there are very effective treatments. Medications and therapy complement each other to boost brain chemicals. In extreme cases, electroconvulsive therapy, which is like a controlled seizure in a patient's brain, is also very helpful. Other promising treatments, like transcranial magnetic stimulation, are being investigated too. So if you know someone struggling with depression, encourage them, gently, to seek out some of these options. You might even offer to help with specific tasks, like looking up therapists in the area or making a list of questions to ask a doctor. To someone with depression, these first steps can seem insurmountable. If they feel guilty or ashamed, point out that depression is a medical condition, just like asthma or diabetes. It's not a weakness or a personality trait, and they shouldn't expect themselves to just get over it, any more than they could will themselves to get over a broken arm. If you haven't experienced depression yourself, avoid comparing it to times you've felt down. Comparing what they're experiencing to normal temporary feelings of sadness can make them feel guilty for struggling. Even just talking about depression openly can help. For example, research shows that asking someone about suicidal thoughts actually reduces their suicide risk. Open conversations about mental illness help erode stigma and make it easier for people to ask for help. And the more patients seek treatment, the more scientists will learn about depression, and the better the treatments will get.
And that brings us to the highlight of tonight. Y'all know we always have esteemed guests of the highest regard on this show, but tonight we are taking it to a whole new level. Not only do we have a California senator on the show, but she is California's only Black woman senator. Y'all, we making history tonight. Welcome Senator Sydney Kamlager to the show. Hey, Senator Kamlager, how are you?
I'm good. I'm chilling. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm so excited I get to interview you. First off, congratulations on winning your election. You're now senator representing the 30th Senate District and also the only Black woman senator. Give it up, y'all. So what has that experience been like coming from the Assembly to the Senate? And what are you looking forward to achieving in your newly elected role?
Well, it's been fun. It was bittersweet leaving a group of folks that I really came to love and learn the ropes with on the Assembly side. But joining the Senate, there really is a senatorial feel over there. It is quieter. The chamber is smaller. You know, people talk with more measured tones. And so, you know, they make you kind of feel like, you know, you're bigger than you are. But I have to tell you, the grind to get bills passed and to get those votes is equally hard. So don't let the numbers fool you. It was also a little crazy, I will have to say, the transition from the Assembly to the Senate with like changing your email addresses and the phones, and then having folks kind of on board during COVID and not feeling like you were leaving your constituents in a lurch. You know, that was a little challenging, but we are over the humps with that. And jumping right into it, we're doing some major healthcare bills that are all about anti-discrimination and making sure that everyone has access to healthcare. We are doing some major criminal justice reform bills, making sure that we are not profiling folks and charging them and jailing them just because of the color of their skin. and we're doing some major housing bills, actually something for LA County having a regional housing authority trust fund, so that we can get this housing production on.
So, just a little of this and a little of that. So
a little of this, a little of that.
So the term health equity has become more widespread over the past year. Can you talk about what health equity means to you and what it means for the people in your district?
It means access. Health equity means not having to drive 15 or 25 miles to get a prescription filled or to be able to see a doctor. It means being able to visit a provider that either looks like you or comes from your experiences or is willing to serve you and heal you the same way they would do anyone else, right? It means not having to figure out if you're going to pay rent or go to the doctor, right? That's what health equity means. We look around and we see so many deserts and swamps, and I don't mean like marshland and topography. I mean access to good food and access to good health care and access to good air and access to good water. All of that is about healthcare access and equity.
So during your time in the legislature, you've led huge reforms aimed at reforming the criminal justice system, also actively working to advance healthcare access and affordability. As an advocate in both of these spaces, can you speak on how the broader fights for criminal justice and health equity are connected?
Yeah, well, on so many fronts. I mean, I think the underlying issue for so many of these things that we face is around economic justice. Poor folks, right? And then poor Black folks, poor brown folks, poor immigrant folks, poor indigenous folks, suffer more so than others because you're profiled. It's assumed that you don't need it, that your threshold for pain is higher. You've gotten so far without it. You've gotten so long so far without it. You don't need it. You can't afford it. Maybe I'll become liable if I help you. All of those things. And then that feeds its way into our education system, into our criminal justice system, into our housing systems, into our employment systems. So that's like on the macro level. If you're just going to give like a real example, let's talk about mental health, right? And the mental health challenges that folks face when they are touched by the criminal legal system. Everything from the first time they're stopped by a police officer to when they're arrested, charged, go before the judge, have to defend themselves against a prosecutor, get sentenced, get put in jail, get into prison. All of those steps along the way, steps that we've created in our system, are traumatizing. And none of those steps ever take into consideration someone's circumstances, what got them there in the first place and made them make the kinds of choices that they made. And then their mental health, their own mental health, the mental health in their community, in their families, in their homes. I think COVID has shown us that this glossy thing that you see with my lipstick and my hair and my glasses, is a facade. You really don't know the struggles that I'm dealing with inside of me and how, if I have the tools to make the kinds of decisions that will keep me safe and keep you safe, right? We think everyone comes to the table with all of those tools, and that's not the case for so many reasons beyond their control. And so I think there's intersection there. And it's not something that we talk about readily because it's really hard to unpack and examine and confront in order to fix.
And on that, I know you're authoring a number of bills that are tied to health equity, including AB 118, the Crisis Act, AB 369, street medicine, and AB 642, patients over profits. Can you briefly speak on each of these bills and what you're hoping they can achieve if signed into law?
Yes. Well, I am expecting and hoping that they will all get passed and signed into law. So I'm telling it to you right now with your audience so folks make the calls they need to make. AB 118, the Crisis Act, introduced last year and reintroduced this year, will fund community-based organizations across the state to step in and respond to 911 calls so that police officers don't have to. 70% of the calls that come in through 911, nonviolent, non-criminal in nature. They are crises and emergencies. They need a response, but maybe not a response that also comes with a baton, a taser, or a gun. 369 is a street medicine bill. It says, why don't we take our healthcare providers and use them to meet our homeless folks where they are? Right now, if a homeless person who is eligible for healthcare through Medi-Cal needs to visit a doctor, they have to get the phone, make the appointment, go to the brick and mortar, get the transportation there, fill out the application, when you sign in, use their ID. All of those things end up being barriers, especially, if you're homeless and are just sort of traumatized with the daily course of life and survival that it takes to live on the streets. So this bill would say, instead of you having to go to the doctor will come to you. The shelter, the permanent supportive housing, the tent, the encampment, wherever, it is about providing health care. SB 642 says, hey, hospitals, you cannot make healthcare decisions based on non-medical information or data. So don't deny healthcare because it's too expensive. Don't deny healthcare because somebody is a woman or LGBT. Don't deny healthcare because you don't want to have to pay for that particular treatment. And we see this more and more because we are corporatizing healthcare and we are corporatizing medicine. And that becomes more about the bottom line than the patient. Hospitals run facilities. Doctors take care of patients. Let's get back to the basics. So the hope and the goal is that we will be saving lives with all of these bills. That's the goal, pure and simple. Save lives.
Wow. Wow. Are you sure you're a politician? You're talking like a person a lot right now.
I'm talking like a person. I'm a politician or an elected official, but I'm just speaking truth, right? That's what the people want to hear.
We love to see it. So I got one last question for you, and it is the question that I ask everyone who comes on this show because I am an expert joy hunter. Where do you find your joy these days?
Wow. Well, my joy is actually right behind me and coming to see you. Her name is Casey, and I got her. She's a COVID kitty, and I love her. And so when I am stressed or sad or just feeling quiet or just wanting some love, I find joy in hanging out with her, and I think she finds joy in hanging out with me. She definitely likes Zoom.
And I'm sure Zoom likes her. That's always the thing. Anytime that an animal like interrupts a Zoom meeting, like the whole meeting has to stop. Everyone has to be introduced.
That's what it is. So I have found that when I Zoom, she gets right on top of the keyboard and just plants herself there. So she's either saying, Mommy, you haven't introduced me, or she's saying, Mommy, it's time to go.
Or she's saying, I have something I'd like to contribute to the chat.
That's right. She's the Mommy, I want to talk to the guy in the checkerboard in the corner. That's right.
Well, Senator Kamlager, thank you so much for joining us. We'll have to have you back to get an update on how things are going on all of these bills and all of the wonderful work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being who you are and doing what you do and being a person as well as a politician. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. Happy to be here. Would love to come back and give you an update. And thank you for recognizing that I am a regular person too.
And that brings us to the end of another history-making episode of Masked Up. We want to thank the half of the internet that tunes in each and every week. I'm Andrew Defy. As always, shout out and big thanks to Netta, Suchita, Allison, and the rest of the Masked Up show crew. You are the wind beneath my wings. Like we always do at this time, from all of us to all of you, like Mazi said, health is wealth, and I need my bag. Covered faces don't get cases. Health doesn't come from a pharmacy, y'all. Till next time.